Welcome back. Now, President Cyril Ramaphosa is hosting another gender-based violence summit from tomorrow. The summit comes at a time the country continues to record an increasing number of horrifying GBV and femicide cases. Over 9,000 cases of rape and 6,000 of murder against women and children were reported in the latest crime stats. We discuss this now with University of Johannesburg researcher on gender-based violence, Lisa Vetten, who's joining us now via Zoom. Lisa, thank you so much for speaking to us. Here you are again, yet another gender-based violence presidential summit, the first one back in 2018. Another talk shop?
One hopes not, because there hasn't been that much significant progress since 2018. So one really hopes that there will be hard things said that will help move the agenda along at this upcoming summit tomorrow and the following day.
And, you know, talking about whether there's been much progress, I think that's quite important. I'm just going to play a short bite from what the Minister of Police said, and I just want you to listen so that you can respond, especially when it comes to the issue that we've had in South Africa pertaining to DNA backlogs that are hindering the National Prosecuting Authority from being able to actually give people justice. Let's just play that bite for Lisa, and then you'll respond to what he said.
With the first quarter of the year 2021-2022, April, we had that huge backlog of 241,000 backlog of the DNA. Most of the DNA would be the women abused, raped, and the murders, which you are not going to resolve those cases if those things are not done. Well, we have given the reasons and that we have tried to correct. One of the major things was the non-professional management of contracts. 16 contracts were allowed to collapse. All those contracts are in place, and all those contracts are monitored on month-to-month basis. Since that April of 2041, we have reduced the backlog to 71,000. We expect to deal with to complete the backlog come January. We had put October, but we have come back for reassessment, and by January we would have done with backlog and we'll be doing a day-to-day kind of new entrance so that we are able to respond quickly to the issue of DNA, and we are able to work in terms of reaction and finding those people that are perpetrators on them.
And what's your response to that, Lisa? I mean, 241,000 backlog in January, now brought down to 71,000. It's quite a large number. But is it enough? Should we even be having these problems to start with?
To be honest, the DNA backlog is an old and recurrent problem. I can remember back in the early 2000s, then already having DNA backlogs. So the question is, can they sustain this decrease in the backlog? That's the first question. The second question is, what are they doing about the quality and the number of police detectives? Do we have enough of those to be able to make something of that DNA evidence and to build cases? The other thing we have to remember is that probably about 40% of rapes in South Africa are stranger rapes. And that's where DNA is most important. But at this point, those are the cases where the police are least likely to make arrests. And we saw how important DNA becomes, for example, in the Krugersdorp gang rapes. So DNA is important, but it's no substitute for very good police work in the context of stranger rape, which can be more difficult because you don't have a name, you don't have an address, sometimes you don't even have a description. So police have to use different kinds of investigative skills. But I want to link this to another problem, and that's the backlog. That is something we have taken our eye off. My analysis of the NPA's conviction rates over the last 10 years shows that we have now dropped to just over half the number of cases being prosecuted as compared to 2013-14, when we were prosecuting the greatest number. So you've also got to look at the backlogs in the courts, where contracts were also allowed to lapse, and equipment like closed-circuit television and microphones was not working. And so cases have been postponed for months and months. Some are now in their 5th year. So, you know, we've got to look beyond the question of DNA backlogs to look at the criminal justice system as a whole and to pay much more attention to the courts than we have, because there's a very significant problem there right now.
And I think the other issue, I mean, you saw, for instance, with the investigation of the gang rape that happened in Krugersdorp, those 14 men, well, actually 13 men and one minor, alleged illegal minors having been let go of rape charges and assault charges because, DNA came back to say they were not the ones who actually committed the crime. So the NPA having to drop that charge against them. But both the NPA and police going back to the victims, saying the victims pointed them out, but DNA is the one that proved that they were not part of that particular crime.
Yes, and I think that was quite a difficult case because some of those men were wearing balaclavas, which also makes it difficult to identify them. The other is that it was a very chaotic, disorienting experience. So I think under those circumstances, when you are in a state of shock and trauma, your ability to recognize is going to be weakened, which is why the DNA then becomes so important, and why all the supplementary kind of investigative work, like trying to trace where did all that stolen equipment, stolen cell phones, tracking them that way, all that should have been done as well, and I hope it was, in order to supplement and strengthen and add to DNA, because you can't always just rely purely on DNA in a rape case.
And Lisa, I don't know about you. I mean, I covered the presidential summit on GBV back in 2018, and I think it took place in October back then. And one of the things that the president had asked or had said, promised would be prioritized is actually establishing a court that specializes specifically with GBV and femicide or abuse against children, etc. And that court was launched basically in Boysons a few years ago or a few months after that summit. But I don't see anything else that the president has promised back then having been implemented by now. I don't know if maybe I'm incorrect.
No, I think that's right. I think there have been, you see, I think this is where we have a very significant problem, because we sit with a state that is, as many people criticize every single day, is not at its best right now. It's quite possibly the weakest it's ever been. So I think to expect such a weak government, it was such a weak state at this point, to be able to do anything effective is unfortunately wishful thinking. We need to focus much harder on trying to get government working again, to get competent people into positions. We've also got to deal with the fact that thanks to all the corruption that went on under Zuma and appears to still be continuing, money has been taken away. So, for example, the NPA cannot there's been a freeze on the number of prosecutors they can employ for a number of years. That has had a real impact on the prosecution in sexual offences courts because there are simply not enough prosecutors to handle all the cases coming through. The same is what we're seeing going on in the police. So we've got to look at the problems within government as well in trying to address this problem. It's not indivisible, separable, and got nothing to do with those problems. And unless we also tackle that and understand how that's undermining and defeating all the other policies, we're not going to be making. We can write as many lovely policies as we want. We can keep having summits, but unless we fix those problems in government, not much is going to change.
And lastly, Lisa, I mean, I don't mean to sound despondent, right? But as you said, it's first the backlog with the police in terms of testing DNA, etc. Then the case goes to court, but the National Prosecuting Authority disappoints, the victims or the survivors. And then sometimes if the National Prosecuting Authority does get a conviction after police's great investigation, you find the Correctional Services Department that will then let go of that particular prisoner, like we saw with Little Buntle in Limpopo, her body mutilated by somebody who was let go twice for firstly attempted murder charges. He was let go, then he was let go again for a murder charge, and now a little girl has passed on. So I don't know, it looks like we're just in trouble in South Africa on all fronts, and every single department that's supposed to look after the livelihoods of women and children keeps disappointing.
Ms. Herg, I'm going to put this into historical context in order to give us a little bit of hope. If you look at our statistics, the high point of the murder of women, femicide, and rape, we don't unfortunately have figures for domestic violence, was actually the 1990s. If we look at our figures now, they're about half what they were in the 1990s. So what that means is that we have been doing something right. The challenge to us is to find out what is it that we were doing right so that we can continue to do that and to do more of that. But at the same time, we also have to, I think, take a reality check, which is when you do a lot of damage to government, you don't fix it overnight. You're talking about 3 to 5 years before things come right. So I think what we have to do is to keep on challenging government in order to correct itself, but I think also to learn from the people who are doing a good job, because there are individuals in government who do their best under these very difficult circumstances. And if we can learn from them how it is that they keep going, and also encourage and support them to keep going in such difficult circumstances, that will help. But we've got to take a long view here. This is not an overnight quick fix, unfortunately.
Yeah, definitely, Lisa. And when you talk about the good people in government who've done their job, I remember that police officer who did such a great job with the Tsegofatso Pule case and getting a conviction on Ntutugo Shoba. Thank you very much, Lisa, for speaking to us here on ENC. And of course, GBV also has to do with you and I as individuals. Are we reporting our brothers, or fathers or cousins for actually abusing or allegedly abusing their partners? Sometimes we don't.